Thanks a lot for joining us on The World Now, and a Happy New Year to you. We begin with U.S. President Donald Trump saying that his country's forces have captured the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, launching what has been called a large-scale strike against the country. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi says President Maduro has been indicted in New York on drugs and weapons charges, and that he will face the full wrath of American laws. Venezuela has also declared a national emergency, declaring or denouncing what it calls U.S. military aggression. And this development follows weeks of heightened tension from President Trump over allegations of the Venezuelan president supporting drug and weapon offenses. But President Maduro alleges the U.S. has interest in Venezuela's oil and minerals, as well as a change of the country's leadership. Well, for more on this developing story now, let's bring in Dr. Brian O'Riordan. He's the Executive Chairman of the 16th Council UK. Thanks a lot, Dr. O'Riordan, for joining us on The World Now. So what's your reaction to the arrest of the Venezuelan president and his wife by U.S. forces?
Well, thank you for having me. And what we witnessed is not just a major news event. I mean, regarding the capturing of President Maduro, it's a historic geopolitical earthquake. And I'll explain this to you. For the first time in modern history, the United States has captured the sitting head of state on foreign soil. You see, this action ends a months-long U.S. military campaign, officially framed as a drug war, but aims squarely at regime change, and that's what we're seeing right now. It removes a key outpost for Russian and Chinese influence in America's backyard and seizes control of the world's largest oil reserves. Yet, this dramatic tactical success creates a monumental strategic challenge. The U.S. now owns a profound power vacuum in a country already in economic freefall. So the critical question is no longer how Maduro was captured, but what happens next? And will this lead to a stable democratic Venezuela or to deeper instability, the humanitarian crisis, and maybe, or is it going to be a new era of interventionism? See, so this path chosen will define the future of the region.
Right, but what do you think? Because you mentioned two key issues now. What happens next? And would this lead to stability in Venezuela that has seen crisis? So what do you think could happen?
Well, there are two things that, I think about. We are looking at two, very divergent paths. The best case scenario is a swift US-backed transitional government that gains military buy-in, secures humanitarian aid, and begins credible elections and economic reconstruction. But the more likely and even a dangerous scenario is a protracted power struggle, right? We could see economic collapse, and we could also see a low-grade civil conflict that the US gets drawn into managing. So success is going to hinge entirely on what the US does in the next 72 hours to stabilize the situation. Something it reportedly did not extensively plan for. See, the mission to capture a man is over. Now there's a mission to secure a nation, and that has just begun.
Right, and there are also speculations as to who is in charge in Venezuela now, with possible names of the vice presidents, the interior and defense ministers as any of the likely replacement for the president, Nicolas Maduro. So where do you box this now in your earlier remarks as to what happens next in terms of stability or stabilizing Venezuela, with or without the intervention of the U.S.?
Thank you for that question. This is the most dangerous unknown, unfortunately. Constitutionally, power falls to the vice president, that's Delcy, who is demanding proof of life for Maduro. But the real power, the military and the socialist party apparatus, is now leaderless. The risk of factional fighting or even protracted insurgency is also very high. The US has achieved a decapitation strike, but now faces the far more complex task of managing a potential collapse, which could trigger a new wave of refugees towards neighboring Colombia and regional instability. So that's the most dangerous unknown. We see how things unfold.
Right. There's also, naturally, there's been a lot of reactions to the development of the strikes in Venezuela, though U.S. is saying there doesn't seem to be any need for future attacks now that the Maduros have been captured. But in terms of the constitutionality of this, the U.S. is saying the Maduros are going to be charged on American soil and all of that. But then there's also speculation as to what's the justification for this in the absence of a declaration of war on Venezuela.
Well, the U.S. stated, the stated reason that the U.S. gave us is that it was a fight against narco-terrorism. And of course, they accused Maduro in a circle of drug trafficking. And but most of what we've seen is actually very dangerous because you see the reaction of both allies and non-allies of both US and Venezuela. You see Russia condemning that. You see other countries, including Iran, condemning that, right? And then you see a country like Argentina rejoicing over that. So some of what we're seeing doesn't look constitutionally right. But you see, it began with the framing of the situation as narco-terrorism. And US accused his inner circle of drug trafficking. But when we also look at the scale of the operation, involving carrier groups and special forces, points to much larger goals. So what we see is this is an execution of a new Trump corollary, to the Monroe Doctrine, designed to forcibly remove hostile powers. In this case, Russia and China from the hemisphere to secure Venezuela's men's oil wealth. And the drug narrative, therefore, provided a legal justification for a premeditated geopolitical strike. So because that narrative is already in place, it's already been called a narco-terrorism, so that kind of makes it a little bit different in dealing with the situation. Because ordinarily, it's supposed to be grossly wrong to enter a sovereign country, and some has called it kidnap the head of state. So there's a lot of things that are very, very uncommon, that we are seeing playing here.
And what are your thoughts as to what this means for Nicolas Maduro and his wife? It appears that they're now in the United States now, but what are your thoughts as to what this means for them legally?
Well, the US has stated that they'll be tried in the US, so we're going to see a trial, and we're going to see a lot of folks. I believe that Maduro and his wife are safe, and I believe that in the coming days there will be, clarity around the path that the US government wants to take. But we also even needed to look at what this means for international law, right? Because you see that the reaction that is coming reveals a stark global divide. Close allies, like Argentina mentioned earlier, are rejoicing, and some others, including NATO partner Germany, and even a regional ally of the US, Colombia, have condemned it as blatant violation of sovereignty. Russia has called it an act of aggression. And this action, here's what I'm mentioning this action fundamentally challenges the UN Charter by establishing a precedent for unilateral military intervention based on a nation's subjective interpretation of another's threats. And this could empower other great powers to act similarly in their own sphere of influence. And that can potentially usher in a more volatile rule by force international order. That's even something that is very serious that we are watching.
Right. Okay, and added to this now, when you add this to the controversy now, is to whether this could also pave the way for the emergence of the opposition in Venezuela to come and claim its mandate. I use those words cautiously, looking at how the last election in Venezuela ended and the controversies that still emanate from it. But what are your thoughts, really?
Well, I see that the U.S. wants a friendly Venezuelan government. Because of course, when that happens, it helps their geopolitical interests when it comes to Russia, for example, and then China. Most of the Venezuelan oil exports goes to China. And by having a government that is more aligned to the United States government, that will weaken China's influence and deal a serious blow to their economy. So, of course, that said, the US will be very, very interested in seeing a regime that is aligned to their interests. So, yeah, the opposition and all of that, but these are all, we are watching this right now, but these are possibilities that we can see in coming days.
All right, Dr. Reuben, we'll put you on hold and return just after this break for more contributions from your end. Please stay with us. You're watching The World Now, and there's more in a moment. Right, thanks a lot for joining us. You're still watching The World Now on TVC News, and we have been speaking in the last couple of minutes with Dr. Brian O. Reuben for his reactions on the arrest of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife in Venezuela. Of course, this in addition to airstrikes were carried out by the U.S. government. Thank you very much, Dr. Reuben, for hanging on. So let's pan to the other side now regarding the claims by the Venezuelan leader who's now been captured, so to speak. He says that this interest of the U.S. is really all about the rich Venezuelan oil reserves and, the change of leadership in the country. Helps speak to this claims now by Mr. Maduro.
Well, they cannot, those claims cannot be completely dismissed because while this has been, framed as an narco-terrorist war, when we look at it, as I didn't mention earlier, the scale of it and the special forces, this points to something more than that. So yeah, it is possible that the U.S. is interested in Venezuelan large oil reserves, not necessarily because the mine wants to steal the oil, but it could be about new markets. It could be about China, as I mentioned, because China, most of their oil, goes to China, and by the U.S. taking control of the situation, that can change. And those we can see supplies more supplies go to America instead. So yeah, that may not be totally dismissed, but that is not to say that the U.S. claim about drugs and all of that are not unfounded, because if you look at the situation through the years, you realize that this is something that they have also been managing. The U.S. has applied strategic patience. They've used things like sanctions, and the sanctions has already dealt, a horrible blow to the economy of Venezuela. And that even brings us to something, else that I think we should also talk about, which is the immediate impact, especially on global oil prices, because now we're talking oil. Because you see that paradoxically, the immediate oil market impact is kind of muted. Prices could see a brief risk premium, but Venezuela's oil exports have already been crippled, by U.S. sanctions and naval blockade. So the real transformation, it's long term. And with Maduro gone, the path is open for future government to attract the massive foreign investments, which are estimated to be between 80 to 100 billion US dollars needed to revive production. We could see Venezuela return as a major oil producer in the coming years, which could reshape global energy flows and be a significant setback for China, which was, of course, the primary buyer of Venezuelan crude.
Right. Of course, information or raw facts now are kind of thin at the moment, and many are expecting more clarity as to the matter, especially the whereabouts of the Maduros now by the U.S. president. We've also listened and seen that the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is saying he's awaiting more information and has refused to give, a definite reaction to what we know as of now. But for you, as a keen observer of this, tell us about the clarity that you need now to speak further to this issue. What is key for you right now, especially what we know and what we don't know? What is key for you right now?
We need a clear statement from the US government, and that, as of now, hasn't happened, because what we're seeing is, you see, just like Kirsten said, he's refused to condemn waiting for more information. So it is difficult because it is easy to speculate. But when official statements are released, it becomes a little bit easier to look at not just what the statement is saying, but what might not have been said, all right? But I'm really worried about something aside from all of this. And one of that is if the goal is genuine political change, the US then must be prepared for a long, costly commitment. See, historical analogies like the post-World War Germany and Japan also, which took years of occupation, suggest nation building is not swift. And this will require a sustained security presence, economic stabilization, and humanitarian aid to prevent total collapse of the economy. And this is the burden that the American public must be willing to bear.
Well, we've seen Venezuela's neighbors also speaking to the controversies now, or to the developments in the country, of course, expressing solidarity largely with Venezuela. What do you think this means, or what do you think this could project for the future?
We now live in a world where the rules are selectively applied, all right? This is what we see. It is very easy to issue statements. A statement that does not translate to deterrence or that doesn't lead to punitive actions are largely useless. So yes, it's great to say this is an aggression and then do nothing. It is great to say the US has done badly, they shouldn't have done this. But after that, what happens? The US has done what they want to do. And the United Nations will soon issue statements, perhaps condemning it, perhaps calling for calm, perhaps making some demands. But it's one of those situations where we keep arguing that the United Nations has largely lost their relevance. It's more like a toothless bulldog. So those are things that one should be worried about. Yeah, so there's that show of solidarity, right? Some countries are saying, no, this is wrong. This is an out of aggression. Some countries are saying, well, it's correct. It should have happened a long time. Some are saying, right, we won't say anything yet to get more information.
Right.
See, so it is a state who found ourselves in the world, and that's very, very dangerous.
All right, let's end our discussion now by bringing this home to Africa and what this could mean for Africa, because there are some countries, even in the western part of the country, that have experienced crises of diverse development that have even prompted ECOWAS to speak out with possibilities of a military assault or invasion, so to speak, by ECOWAS in those countries. What do you think this could also mean for Africa?
So, sorry, I missed a little bit of.
Right, I'm asking, still looking at the international implications, how this could also impact, relations in Africa, especially when you look in the light of, happenings in West Africa that has seen ECOWAS speaking to the military developments in those countries, Guinea, and the likes, Niger included. What do you think this could also mean for the ECOWAS leadership? Do you think this could bring a more forceful ECOWAS moving forward?
Well, you see, the capture of President Nicolas Maduro, by the U.S. doesn't affect Africa directly. There is set two very significant global precedents that are highly relevant to the continent. The first is the normalization of unilateral military action. It's the first one. And what we're seeing is this new president, the U.S. action enforces a new Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, justifying intervention based on a nation's own national interest rather than international law or a UN mandate. Now, this creates a legal gray zone. What is this relevance to Africa? Well, this could be cited by global powers to justify similar military interventions in Africa. Potentially under the banner of fighting terrorism or trafficking or protecting resource interests. So these action masses, a swift in international norms that moves the world away from rules-based, multilateralism, which matters greatly for African, states' sovereignty. And then secondly, the escalation of resource-focused geopolitics. And the U.S. explicitly aims to counter China and Russia, as I mentioned earlier, securing oil resources and realigning South American economies for the U.S. benefits.
Right.
As a continent rich in critical minerals, all right, and energy resources, Africa is a primary TSF for the U.S.-China strategic rivalry. The Venezuelan, event signals a more aggressive event,
right.
a zero-sum approach,
right.
to these competitors. So it could accelerate the scramble for influence, trade deals, and security arrangements, forcing African nations into a more polarized landscape. Right.
Well, this would be a fine place to rest our conversation. We thank you very much for sustaining this dialogue, especially looking to the developments in Venezuela. Dr. Brian O. Ruben, thanks a lot for your time with us on The World Now, and a very happy New Year to you.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year.
Right, that's The World Now. Today, don't forget you can get more updates on all the stories we